Welcome to the equator, welcome to the Guiana Space Center with a new Ariane mission for ESA and for the European Commission. In under 90 minutes from now, Ariane 5 will lift off from Kourou with, under the fairing, 4 Galileo satellites. But for the time being, let's hear from the English commentator, Katie Haswell. Hi, Katie, where are you?
I'm in Mission Control, the nerve center of operations here at the Spaceport. People here fondly know it as the Jupiter Control Room. And behind me here is what we call the fishbowl. This is the glass area where the operational teams are focusing very hard at this point before launch. We are about 18.5 minutes now to launch. Over to Stefan Israel, who is the chairman, the CEO of Arianespace, to tell us more about tonight's mission. Stefan.
So, dear Minister, dear ESA DG, Monsieur le Préfet, dear representatives of European nations, dear customers and partners, ladies and gentlemen, Arianespace is delighted to welcome you from the CSG for this new Ariane 5 mission, the 6th and last one of the year with our heavyweight vehicle. In a few minutes, we are going to use for the second time our Ariane 5 ES to launch 4 more Galileo satellites for the European Commission in the framework of a contract signed with the European Space Agency. As of this launch, the European Global Navigation Satellite System Agency, GSA, will be responsible for the satellite's operation in collaboration with ESA. The 4 satellites have been manufactured by OHB. Thanks to the EC and ESA for your trust. As you can see on the control screen behind me, Ariane 5 is on the launch pad after having been transferred yesterday. All the operations linked to the final countdown went well. So we should be in a position to launch in a few minutes at exactly 3:36 p.m. As you know, the liftoff occurs 7 seconds after the H0 at the ignition of the solid boosters. Ariane 5 will then head towards the northeast to separate the satellites 2 by 2 in a circular medium Earth orbit at an altitude of 22,922 kilometers, inclined at 57 degrees with respect to the equatorial plane. This mission is a long one. We will need to be patient. 2 Galileo satellites will first separate at H0 plus 3 hours and 35 minutes. The 2 last Galileo satellites will then separate at H0 plus 3 hours and 55 minutes, marking the end of the mission. Our launch is now just a few minutes away. So go Ariane 5, go Galileo, go United Europe for space, and of course, enjoy the show. Thank you.
So, Galileo, Europe's very own satellite navigation system. Once the constellation is complete, it will consist of 24 satellites with some spares, and if all goes well today, we will have 22 satellites in space. Joining me is the Director General of the European Space Agency, Jan Werner. Jan, thank you very much indeed for coming to the floor. Jan, it's been quite a journey. You've got nearly a full constellation. You launched the first ones in 2006.
Yeah, it is a long journey, but it is also a very important project. So you cannot do it on one day. And we did it the European way. That means we have a lot of partnerships within Europe with different companies. So we have also different organizations, the European Commission, the GSA, the European Space Agency, we have the industry. So I think we did it in a very transparent way, and therefore the success is there.
And quite a job of cooperation, if you like, also between the European Union and ESA. And obviously, this is one of the big flagship programs. Copernicus is another one of those programs to help us better understand our planet. How important are these programs for Europeans?
I think it is clear that these type of programs like Copernicus, like Galileo, and we should mention at the same time also EGNOS, they are, first of all, they are a European point in space because we have really some autonomy in space. And if you look to Copernicus, it's the world leading Earth observation system. And if you look to Galileo, it is now the best in class with its performance already right now, although it's not fully completed. So it is very important for Europe to have a clear, independent point also for satellite navigation.
And if we just fast forward a bit now to the future, we can already see a part of it physically here at the spaceport because we've got the launch zone being built for Ariane 6. What does the future hold?
So the future is very bright and it's broad at the same time. So we are developing new launcher family, Ariane 64, 62 and Vega C. This is a new generation, much cheaper than the current launcher. So therefore we are more competitive in a very changing launcher sector worldwide. At the same time we are thinking about new Copernicus satellites for Earth observation. We are thinking also about what should be the next generation of Galileo. And besides that, don't forget about exploration, telecommunication, and all of these aspects. So space in Europe is now really a very broad and bright activity.
And Werner, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
So here in the Mission Control Center, we have a number of different teams, and each one of those teams sitting at a different desk. One of those teams, an important team, is the flight desk or the flight control desk. That's the team we're looking at here. This is the Arianespace top management. They make all the final decisions in the event of unplanned situations, and of course those decisions based on very concrete information coming from the teams all the way across the base here at the Guiana Space Center. Right, let's take a look now at our launcher and the satellites and get some facts and figures. Over to you, Thierry.
Yes, Kelly, gros plan sur le lanceur et les passagers du soir.
Yes, indeed. Let's take a look at the launcher and the payloads. It's Ariane 5 ES, 47 meters high, a liftoff mass of 760 tons. Initial thrust will come from the solid boosters surrounding the Vulcan 2 engine. The medium fairing measures 14 meters in height, and it protects, as we know, 4 passengers this evening. Each of the passengers weighs 750 kilos, so you multiply that by 4, and you add the mass of the dispenser, which is the system that keeps them in their star-shaped assembly, and you have the required performance of 3.282 tons today. This is the 7th full operational capability, or FOC, mission. Now, I said that the flight this evening did not have a launch window. We have a fixed time at GMT, 18 hours, 36 minutes and 7 seconds, to be precise. Now, let's take a look at exactly where we are currently. We are some 9 hours flight distance from Paris and is referred to as Europe's gateway to the stars. In other words, Kourou. We leave Europe, heading west-southwest, and after about 7,000 kilometers, we reach the South American continent. We're to the north of Brazil, in French Guiana, and you see that little dot, that's Kourou. At the mouth of the Kourou River, you can see the promontory of the Roche and the Tour Dreyfus. Kourou is on the Atlantic Ocean, and in the distance you can see the renowned Devil's Island, which harks back to the times of the penal colony. And then we move up the coast towards the Space Center, flying over some of the small lakes that are like mirrors dotted around the town. 10 kilometers up the space road, and here we come to the entry to the Guiana Space Center. You can see it now with the famous scale model of Ariane 5. And obviously this is where we have the Space Museum that so many people have visited over the years. And just next to the museum, we have the Jupiter Control Center, and that is precisely where we are, Katie, are we not? This is the Jupiter Control Center, important for all of the launches here from Guiana.
Indeed, and here we are inside that Jupiter Control Center that we could see from the outside. But of course, the launcher and the passengers are on the pad. It's one of 3 pads here at the Space Center. It's called ELA-3, and there are quite a lot of facilities here. The Space Center covers a huge area, about 750 kilometers square, about the size of the island of Martinique, actually. And you can just imagine how complicated it is getting information to all the people and all the facilities across the range. And that's why we have these panels. These are called the status panels. All the systems across the base are sending their health status here to the Mission Control Center, and they're reflected in those panels showing us the status of the rocket and the pad, the satellites, and the range being the base. They're a bit like traffic lights, they all have to be green for the launch to go ahead. Over now to the mission.
The first phase of the flight is a standard one with the EAP and EPC. So the launcher will be followed by a ground station located in Guyana for the first phase. Then we have a boat in the Atlantic Ocean. Then we have a station in the Azores. And for the rest of the mission, we have New Inertia's ground station, which follows the second boost of EPS and the separation of the Galileo satellites. So the sequence is as usual for the EAP and EPC flight. Then we have the first boost of EPS, which lasts about 11 minutes. After this boost, we have about 3 hours of ballistic phase in order to reach the altitude required for the Galileo satellites. We have the second boost of EPS, which lasts about 6 minutes in order to circularize the orbit around the Earth. And shortly after the cutoff of the second boost of EPS, we have the separation of the first two satellites. After the first separation, we have to wait 20 minutes before the second separation, during which the two last satellites are separated. Then the EPS is left on the graveyard orbit, and that's the end of the mission for Ariane 5.
So a long journey ahead tonight. It's going to take us about 4 hours to deliver our 4 satellites. A couple of key people here in mission control. This is the mission director in charge of the launch campaign. And another important person is the range operations manager. She calls out all the major events in the flight tonight. Today it's Fleur, and you'll be hearing her voice.
À 12 de DDO, attention pour la séquence finale lanceur.
She's about to call out the beginning of the synchronized sequence.
Top H0 7 minutes.
Voilà donc la séquence synchronisée qui est lancée. Les calculateurs au sol effectuent les dernières mises en œuvre électriques et mécaniques.
The ground computers carrying out the last electrical and mechanical checks that allow the launcher and its passengers to become fully autonomous before liftoff. The sequence involves a number of checks and parameters to verify very quickly, and it's a sequence that's totally automatic. The campaign began on the 18th of September with the arrival in Kourou of the first 2 satellites. They arrived by pairs here in French Guiana. So 18th of September was the start of the campaign, and we're now going to hear about the campaign together with Raphaël Breda and Thierry Villemar.
The objective of the Ariane 5 VA240 campaign is to place 4 Galileo FOC-M7 satellites in orbit. The satellite campaign began 3 months ago in September with the arrival of 2 first satellites. The next 2 satellites arrived in October. We transferred them to their preparation building S1A. The satellites were finalized and checked and were then transferred in the filling hall S3B. There, the satellites were filled and inspected. We then move into the so-called POC phase, where we assemble the satellite and launcher elements.
The launcher campaign began October 23. Ariane Group and Arianespace teams made up of about 23 people worked hard to meet deadlines. On Friday, the Launch Readiness Review authorized us to carry out final operations and transfer the launcher to the launch zone on Monday. Then, operations to prepare the countdown took place over 48 hours. The synchronized sequence will begin at T0-7 minutes, during which all operations will be carried out automatically until liftoff.
And this is the day before launch, the final transfer. The fully assembled vehicle on top of its launch table leaves the final assembly building and is rolled out to the pad. All 1,500 tons. It travels very slowly along specially designed rails to maintain its stability. The whole process takes just over an hour. And now it's ready for launch. That was yesterday. Now here we are today, just under 4 minutes to launch. This is the program director in charge of the contract for Arianespace, and the head of the Galileo program department for the European Space Agency, and the director of navigation, the navigation department at the European Space Agency. Here we can see some shots there from our drone, which is flying over. It's been very wet here. We've had driving rain all day, and you can see heavy clouds there in the skies. But it seems to have cleared a little bit, so let's hope we get a reasonably good view before the launcher goes and hides behind the clouds. So far, we've been concentrating on the Mission Control Center that's in charge of the whole mission, everything across the range. But there's another control center. This is the Launch Control Center. And everybody here is in charge of the actual launch itself. So they are in a special building, often known as the bunker, because it's a concrete blockhouse. It's protected because it's only a few kilometers from the launch pad. Got about 100 people working in here. They deal with all the systems concerning the launch vehicle and the launch zone. These guys and girls started their preparations months ago, and right now their job is to make sure that the Ariane rocket is ready for takeoff. They're monitoring events during this synchronized sequence that Thierry was explaining back there. The computers right now are running all the final controls, and they have to coordinate an awful lot of checks in a very short period of time. And once all the conditions are correct, the onboard computer will give the order to start the engines. You've got a really good view there from the drone of the launch zone. You can see the tall building to the right is the assembly building. You can see those heavy skies over the spaceport. We heard earlier that we will be getting a 7-second delay, so you'll be able to count 7 seconds once you see the first ignition of the main Vulcan engine. That's because we need to check the main engine before we switch on
de DDO, attention pour moins 1 minute.
The boosters, coming up to 1 minute.
Top H0 moins 1 minute.
We are 1 minute to launch. We're live at the Guiana Space Center for the launch of 4 satellites for Europe's Galileo satellite navigation Constellation for the European Space Agency and the European Commission, built by a consortium led by OHB, and they're traveling on board the 240th Ariane 5 heavy lifter. Our very best wishes to all the teams. Let's sit back now and watch the launch.
À tous de DDO, attention pour le décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, top. Allumage Vulcain. Allumage des 2 EAP et décollage Ariane 240 Galileo FOC-M7. La propulsion est nominale. Tous les paramètres à bord sont
And
normaux.
there they go. Blazing a trail across the sky here over the spaceport, the Guiana Space Center. We're heading northeast out over the Atlantic Ocean, and we can hear the launcher as she flies over us here. We're about 20 kilometers from that pad. We reached Mach 1 after 45 seconds when we broke the sound barrier. And right now, it's the boosters that are doing all the
Tous les
work.
paramètres à bord sont normaux.
She's telling us that everything on board is going to plan. They are providing 90% of our thrust right now. That's the equivalent of 12 jet engines, and their job is to push us away from the gravity of our planet. We need a lot of firepower to do that.
Est nominale.
She's telling us that the propulsion is going normally. Each booster is burning 2 tons of propellant per second, and that's roughly the equivalent of what an average car would use in a year, and they're using it in a second. Unbelievably, those boosters are burning at roughly 3,000 degrees Celsius, and yet the main stage is
La
burning
trajectoire est nominale.
cryogenic propellant, which is at absolute zero. It's the coldest temperature you can get. So you can just imagine the complexities of balancing and keeping those two temperatures next to each other, the extremely hot and the extremely cold. It's a feat of human
Séparation des
engineering.
deux EAP, la trajectoire est nominale.
And she's announcing separation now of those 2 boosters. We don't need them anymore, and they can be jettisoned. There they go. Those were cameras on a previous launch. We've lost about 3/4 of our weight. The lighter we are, the faster we can go. And we're now burning the main stage. It's that grey section. It's a huge tank of cryogenic propellant, which is liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. It burns for about 9 minutes.
Tous les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
And in a minute, we'll be looking at the launcher again, and we'll be able to see what we call the fairing. That's the front, the nose, if you like, of the launch vehicle.
La propulsion est nominale, tous les paramètres à bord sont normaux.
And she's telling us that everything is normal. Everything's going according to plan. So there you can see the fairing. That's the nose, the pointy bit of the launcher, and the fairing is the section which protects. And this protects the launchers, the satellites, from the riggers of the launch. Those riggers include the acoustic vibrations at liftoff. You can just imagine there that it's very loud. So our satellites are now exposed to space. We took off, you can see there, from the northeastern coast of South America, and Galileo is the... She's telling us that everything's going according to plan still. Galileo is the tracking station here at the Guiana Spaceport, and you can see we're traveling northeast. SNA is the next tracking station to pick us up. That's a boat in the middle of the Atlantic, and then we'll be heading up towards the northwestern coast of Europe, and we'll be picking up the signal at the Azores. Let's find out more now about today's mission.
For this 11th flight of the year, Arianespace is proud to welcome the two-day Ariane 5 VA240 Galileo FOC-M7 mission to deploy 4 more Galileo satellites for the benefit of our customer, the European Space Agency, acting on behalf of the European Commission. Arianespace today reaffirms its company's important role in supporting European governments and institutions with independent, reliable, and available access to space.
This launch will place in orbit 4 more satellites in a series of 22 manufactured by OHB in Germany, embarking payloads provided by SSTL in the UK. 5 FOC satellite launches have already been carried out by Soyuz launchers, each delivering 2 satellites into orbit.
For this launch, a second Ariane 5 ES version dedicated to Galileo mission will be used. with, in particular, a different upper stage called EPS. The EPS storable propellant upper stage is powered by a reignitable engine that operates with MMH and 204 propellants, allowing reignition capabilities, essential for required Galileo mission performance.
This launch campaign started in mid-September 2017 with the arrival in French Guiana of the first pair of satellites. All 4 satellites have undergone a series of tests and preparation activities.
For recall, the specific dispenser carrying structure has been designed by Ariane Group, allowing to support 4 maximum satellite masses of 738 kg each, which cover with comfortable margin the actual satellite masses for this mission.
This campaign has led to additional needs in coordination and technical operations. All these challenges were surmounted through excellent preparation, planning, and execution, the experience gained in the previous Ariane 5 launch campaign, and especially thanks to the very efficient technical teams.
Finally, I would like to thank all involved teams, and firstly our customer, the European Space Agency project team, the satellite manufacturer OHB, and the CNES CSG teams for their very efficient collaboration and fruitful teamwork, which allowed to manage the program and the launch campaign with a great professionalism.
Indeed. 7 minutes and 24 seconds into launch, and today is the 56th mission that Arianespace will have performed for the European Space Agency. And during that film, we picked up the signal at the SNA tracking station. That's the one in the middle of the Atlantic, the boat. Bottom left is our altitude. We are 134 kilometers above our planet. The middle is the distance. That's if you were to draw a straight line along the planet from the launch zone to the position of the launcher. She's telling us there's 1 minute left of a burn on the main stage. And then on the bottom right-hand side, you can see there is our speed. We're traveling at an unbelievable 7 kilometers per second, not per hour, per second. And on the top right-hand, you can see there is our trajectory. That is the planned trajectory. And the white cross is the position, the actual position of the launch vehicle. Burning at the moment the main Vulcan engine. It's propelling the main stage, which is an extremely powerful beast.
Fin de propulsion de l'étage principal cryotechnique.
And we have switched off that
et séparation de l'EPC.
Engine, and we have separation there of the main stage, and we have switched on the engine now of the upper stage. So we're beginning the next phase of the flight. The upper stage.
De l'étage à propergol stockable.
She's saying the first engine switch on of the upper stage. So the upper stage has taken the wheel, and its job is to transport our satellites to their correct orbit so that we can release them absolutely precisely onto their orbit, and from there they'll be heading off on their own in medium Earth orbit to their final slot, and they have to do that all by themselves. We have 3 orbits for anyone who's not familiar. Well, 3 main ones. We've got low Earth orbit, which is the nearest to Earth. We have medium Earth orbit, which is where these guys will be sitting, roughly 23,000 kilometers above our planet. And then we have an orbit called geostationary orbit. We're not using that one today, but that's where most of the telecommunications satellites sit, and that's 36,000 kilometers above Earth. The Galileo program is an important collaboration between ESA and the European Union.
A symbolic image at the European Spaceport in Kourou, French Guiana, as the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, French President Emmanuel Macron, and the Director General of the European Space Agency, Johan Dietrich Voorne, stand in front of the Ariane 5 launcher. which will soon carry 4 more Galileo satellites into space. This launch will expand the Galileo constellation from 18 to 22 satellites. And it's the second time 4 satellites will be launched with an Ariane 5. As with all other Galileo satellites, these newest additions will fly in a medium Earth orbit some 22,000 kilometers above the surface. This is the penultimate launch before completion of the Galileo constellation.
The completion of the constellation will take place in the summer of 2018, where we launched the last Ariane 5 with 4 satellites, which will bring the total up to 26 satellites. So we have at that moment 2 satellites in reserve, and we will then, after that, start putting some extra reserves in space in order to be prepared just in case.
Although the constellation is not yet complete, it's been in operation for almost a year since the European Commission announced initial services on the 15th of December 2016. These services were the first step towards full operational capability and a first opportunity for the Galileo system to prove its worth. Independent measurements since have shown that in terms of performance, Galileo is the best operating positioning system in the world.
We are having a better performance than our 3 competitors from the US, which is the well-known GPS system, the Russian GLONASS system, and the Chinese Baidu system. So of course in ESA we are excessively proud of this, and it is now important that we keep building on this performance and hopefully keep at the forefront of the developments.
However, the work on Galileo is far from over. The European Commission and ESA are already working on the next generation of Galileo satellites and infrastructure. They aim to continuously improve the system and explore the boundaries of technological possibilities, while trying to meet market demand with potential new applications or services.
A number of areas, for example, which are coming is the so-called Internet of Things, which will require positioning in sensors. And these sensors have very little power and very little battery capacity, so we need special signals for that, probably. And in addition, another area which is of interest is autonomous driving, where satellite navigation is going to be a very important component, but where it needs to be integrated with all sorts of other sensors in cars in order to make sure that autonomous driving becomes a reality.
With more launches to complete the constellation and set up redundancies, Galileo's performance and availability worldwide will continue to gradually improve, keeping Galileo at the cutting edge of satellite positioning technology. Today, the only publicly owned satellite navigation system has also proven to be the best.
And joining me here in the commentary box is Eddie Yao. Eddie is the ESA Galileo head of the System Engineering Unit. Eddie, it's a real pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. It's a great time to be here. Thank you.
Just a very quick rundown of what you do and what does that mean?
Indeed. Within ESA Systems Engineering, we're responsible for the actual original design of the system and the flow down of the requirements, as ESA is the system design authority. As part of the system architecture, we make sure that the requirements are all properly flown down and released down there to the people for procurement.
So just back to today's flights, we had the signal, the tracking station in Santa Maria in the Azores picked up the signal during that film. Quick recap of the flight path, Eddie.
So at the moment, the launcher is flying up over the northeast across the Atlantic. It's passing over then the west coast of Europe, and then we'll go up over Russia, and then back down again over the southeast of Asia.
And the ground stations are picking up the signal from Ariane, which sends its signals down to those ground stations as it flies over. And that process is called telemetry. Galileo started offering services last year. She's telling us that everything's going perfectly normally. Just quickly, what are the main services, Eddie?
Indeed, actually, the initial services started December 2016. Over that period, we've been providing already the open service, pure service, and a search and rescue. And then, since then, in the 1st of July, the GSA has become responsible for the actual operations for the service availability.
Let's take a look now at the GSA.
The mission of the European GNSS Agency is to ensure that users in Europe and around the world get the most out of Europe's satellite navigation programs. To do this, one of the agency's key responsibilities is to oversee the operation and service provision of Galileo. In addition to our headquarters in Prague, the GSA manages a number of important Galileo service facilities and functions across Europe.
The GSA operations and service team works with a team of experts at several centers. The Galileo control centers monitor and control the Constellation, working as mutual backups. The European GNSS Service Center operates the Galileo User Help Desk and supports users around the clock. The Galileo Reference Center provides independent monitoring of Galileo's performance and the quality of the signals in space. And the Galileo Integrated Logistics Support Center provides repair and spare part provisioning for the Galileo ground infrastructure.
The GSA also ensures that Galileo signals are secure, including the Galileo Public Regulated Service, which is reserved for institutional users. We are also responsible for the Galileo Security Monitoring Center and ensure the functioning of the EU GNSS Security Accreditation Board. The agency also plays a key role in the development of applications and services, manages EU-funded research, and analyzes the global GNSS market. As a result of our work, today many devices are Galileo-enabled and are already making a difference to users across the globe.
So Galileo satellites making our positioning better and better. She's telling us there's 2 minutes left, less than 2 minutes left on the upper stage burn engine. So the upper stage is indeed powering us. Its job is to deliver our satellites onto what we call a transfer orbit. And it's transfer because they will then travel afterwards on their own to their own final orbital slot. But the transfer orbit's roughly, I think, around about 23,000 kilometers. Eddie, how does Ariane know, how does the upper stage know what it's doing and where it's going?
Well, within the upper stage itself, there's actually an intelligence part to it. It's actually within what's called the vehicle equipment bay. It's more than just an onboard computer, it's actually a whole management system within the launcher itself. It analyzes the information from the engines, from the propulsion, it has a navigation system, and it makes the decisions on what is the best outcome to achieve its mission.
So it's a very clever piece of kit, and it's getting ready right now to switch off the engine. The onboard computer will send the command to switch the engine off when the system senses the correct orientation of the launcher. So basically, the launcher has to be on track, it has to be going in the right direction, it has to be on time. The computer is programmed to understand that it has to fly from 0 to 19 minutes and 50 seconds. That will be the cut-off time. And it also has to be at the right altitude. Right now we are at 1,117 and climbing, traveling at 8.88 kilometers per second.
Première extinction de l'étage à propergol stockable.
So she's confirmed we have the engine has now switched itself off and we have entered the ballistic phase. Eddie, what does that mean?
The ballistic phase is basically when the launcher is travelling without propulsion. The rocket is travelling already high enough and fast enough to cruise without the engines being on. It's on a celestial autopilot, if you will. This will continue actually for more than 3 hours. what you also see is that the upper stage is going on a gentle rotation. This is what they call the barbecue mode. It's exposing each of the satellites gently for a brief period to the sun, just to keep the payloads and the satellites warm enough while it's in this barbecue mode and while it's in this transition. We saw the liftoff 21 minutes ago, and it would be great to see a few replays of that and that beautiful launch.
Nous sommes en phase balistique et la manœuvre d'orientation se poursuit nominalement. Top. Allumage Vulcain. Allumage des deux EAP et décollage Ariane 240 Galileo FOC-M7. La propulsion est nominale.
Voilà donc, avec l'extinction de l'EPS, on vous le disait, on rentre dans une phase balistique, Cathy, une phase qui va être longue, plus de 3 heures, et on se retrouve tout de suite après.
Oui, absolument Thierry, nous allons, I'm suddenly finding myself talking in French. We're going to be coming back to you just before we switch the engine back on again in about 3 hours' time. So that will be 7 o'clock here in Kourou, that will be 10 o'clock at night in Europe. And what time in Paris?
23 heures pour Paris. À tout à l'heure.
11 p.m. in Paris. Bye.
Hello again, welcome back to our live broadcast. Here we are at the Guiana Space Center on the northeastern coast of South America in French Guiana. We are 3.5 hours into the launch of 4 satellites for Europe's Galileo navigation system for the European Space Agency ESA and the European Commission. They lifted off from the pad 3.5 hours ago. And this was the liftoff. Eddie Yao is back in the commentary box. Eddie, you are the head of the system engineering unit. You watched your babies fly into the air earlier with your real eyes, not on the screen. What was it like?
It was an absolutely amazing thing to see. I have to admit, this is the second time actually I've seen it launch. It never ceases to amaze. I mean, first we saw a flash in the background. It was slightly clouded over, but you could still see very, very clearly. I mean, this is the sort of images that we had looking from the terrace. Then you saw the streak of light going up into the sky as the launcher was raising up, and it passed behind the clouds and then reappeared further up. Absolutely beautiful.
And of course you get the rumble.
Indeed. I mean, it got quite high, and only then, after quite a while, you heard this rumble just emanating through the tropical rainforest. It's a beautiful and fantastic thing to see.
So after the liftoff, after 2 minutes, we lost our boosters, which were getting us away from Earth. Then we lost the fairing, which was protecting the satellites after 3.5 minutes roughly. And then we lost the main stage, and the upper stage has been powering us up into space ever since. We had a ballistic phase lasting 3 hours, and we are getting ready to switch our engine back on. Now we can just see there that the upper stage is spinning. Eddie, why is that?
Well, actually, there were two things happening. I mean, one was the actual barbecue mode, which I think is now coming to an end. And actually, I think the satellite, or the launcher, I should say,
Second allumage de l'étage à propergol stockable.
Repositioning itself for the firing of the main engine. Obviously, the launcher was originally in the ballistic phase, which was providing an elliptical orbit. And now we've reached the top of that elliptical orbit, and the speed has dropped quite a bit. We actually need to circularize our orbit for this particular plane and for the Constellation. That's why the firing of the main engine is very important just at this point.
And for anybody who is not familiar with the terms elliptical orbit, that means an orbit which is basically the shape of an egg, a sort of oval shape.
Indeed.
And so we needed to then turn our orbit into a circular shape to make sure we're going round our planet in a circular form. Just a quick reminder here of our speed and altitude. We can see those on the bottom of the screen. Altitude nearly 23,000 kilometers above the Earth. Here's a closer look at the future Ariane 6, the next rocket.
July the 16th, 2020. This is the date currently set for the first launch of the new Ariane 6. For ESA and European industry, the clock is ticking, and 2.5 years appears like tomorrow when it comes to developing launchers and building infrastructure. However, in the green Amazon jungle of Kourou, Ariane 6 is already a reality. The future launch pad is already well underway, and the infrastructure for Europe's newest launcher is taking shape.
We have Ariane 6 for competitivity, Ariane 6 for cooperation, and Ariane 6 for growth. Here is a demonstration with European industries coming here to French Guiana, building with local industries the launch pad from where we will launch mid-July 2020 the first Ariane 6.
The most impressive part of the Ariane 6 launch site is the giant hole for the launch pad, which is now finished. Also visible now are the flame deflectors that will be on each side of the hole. Construction has begun on the 90 meters high launch tower. This tower has to protect and shelter the rocket until a few hours before liftoff. Some 600 meters from the pad, the future Bâtiment d'Assemblage Lanceur, the launcher assembly building, is being built. This is where the different stages of Ariane 6 will be assembled horizontally. This is a new approach, as ESA's previous launchers have always been assembled vertically. This change in method also reflects the changed role for ESA as regards Ariane 6. In the jungle of Kourou, the sound of cranes and bulldozers can be heard, as builders are now working from early morning until late in the evening in an effort to finish the launch site in time. Meanwhile, in Europe, the production of the launcher itself is due to start next year, with several tests of the new engines and boosters that have been developed for Ariane 6. However, Ariane 6 is not the only new launcher which ESA is building. There's also Vega C, the enhanced and more powerful version of the lightweight launcher Vega. Its first launch is planned for 2019. Despite the many challenges, the European Space Agency continues to go forward, securing its new launcher family with Ariane 6 and Vega C. Thanks to ESA and industry, Europe will remain a space power with a guaranteed access to space.
So it's an exciting future we've got there, and Ariane 6 will be taking over the launch of the Galileo satellites at some point, won't it?
Absolutely. Basically, we already have a launch targeted for summer next year, which will be an Ariane 5. Those 4 satellites are already ready. But then after that, as of 2020, we'll be launching additional Galileo satellites from an Ariane 6 launch. And those satellites, which is 12, are already starting procurement as we speak.
Now, as you may know, she's telling us that we have 2 minutes left of the upper stage burn. As you may be familiar, the launcher is sending signals to the ground, and those signals get picked up by the tracking stations, which are dotted along the flight path. Right now, we are using the tracking station in New Norcia to tell us what's happening on the vehicle, And those tracking stations send the telemetry back here to
La propulsion est nominale, le pilotage est calme.
the CVI, which is the real-time visual control team. These are the teams here at the Guiana Space Center who collect the information coming down from Ariane. They do a quick selection to check how the flight is progressing in real time, and they then pass that information to the range operations manager, whose voice you're hearing today, Fleur, who is calling out the main events in the flight. And later, the teams analyze the information to see how the vehicle performed, and they can make adjustments to future flights. That process is known as
La
the
propulsion est nominale, le pilotage est calme.
Level 0 flight evaluation, which takes place several weeks after the launch. So,
Il reste 30 secondes de propulsion de l'EPS.
30 seconds of propulsion left on the upper stage. She's telling us that everything's going according to plan. Getting ready to separate numbers 19 and 21. Why 2 by 2, Eddie?
If we release a single satellite, then that would push the launcher in the other direction compared to the satellite. This actually goes back to Newton's third laws of physics,
Deuxième extinction de l'étage à propergol stockable.
where action and reaction are equal and opposite. And hence it would interfere actually slightly with the launcher itself. So we release two together, opposite each other, and then the launcher itself stays in its orientation.
So we've switched off the
Début de la phase
engine.
d'orientation au profit de la séparation des satellites Galileo 19 et 21.
And we are starting now the orientation phase, which is preparing us now to release our first 2 satellites. You can see there that all the twists and turns and movements on the CGI images have all been very carefully planned. We need to orientate the satellites so that we can drop them off to their correct orbit in space.
Indeed, actually, we are actually 300 kilometers just below the final orbit. This is actually the graveyard orbit that we normally deploy things in. We don't want to deploy things directly into the final slots, because then there's a risk of debris and other items which we don't want in the final constellational slots. So we start from our graveyard orbit, and then gently we float the satellites up to the final position, 300 kilometers higher.
Fin de la manœuvre d'orientation.
So she's telling us that's the end of the orientation maneuver. As I was explaining, we have to orientate the satellites in a very precise position so that they can then travel on that journey on their own, which Eddie has just explained. There's a very, very precise set of
Séparation
movements.
des satellites Galileo 19 et 21.
And we have separation of the first 2 satellites, 19 and 21. We saw them. We can see them on the right-hand side there, Eddie, moving away equally in opposite directions.
And indeed, and the other 2 are still attached to the dispenser.
As you say, we have numbers 20 and 22 attached, and those are going to take 20 minutes before we can start releasing those. Why is that?
Well, 20 minutes gives a little bit of time. Obviously, the first 2 satellites, once they've released from the dispenser, they're starting their switch on, they're starting the computer, they're checking out their systems and all their subsystems, and then after a short period of time, they will try and release the solar arrays so that they can get some power into the satellites themselves. Then after that, it'll start doing some maneuvers so that it can orientate those solar arrays to look towards the sun so it can get power into the satellites. This is all done by thrusters, so of course then the satellites will actually be moving, so we need to give a bit of time so that things can move away so there's no risk of collision. And this is all being monitored from the ground stations. So at the moment the ground stations are just monitoring 2 satellites. If the other 2 to deploy as well, then there won't be much time for them to do their monitoring and do their checks. So we give them a little bit of a breather from 2 satellites and then the next 2.
Navigation plays a hugely important role in all our lives these days, quite often on a device in your pocket.
Galileo satellites orbit Earth at more than 23,000 kilometers. Yet the European Global Navigation System is closer than you think. The latest models of the world's leading mobile phone manufacturers now support Galileo to make positioning more accurate and reliable. Location has become the cornerstone of thousands of applications, including navigation, ride-sharing, localized information, gaming, and even life-saving emergency response. In areas where signals from navigation satellites can be blocked by obstacles, Galileo makes a real difference. Over the past years, the European GNSS agency has worked closely with chipset and handset manufacturers to ensure the smooth integration of Galileo. It not only provides additional satellites to improve positioning, Galileo is also at the heart of mobile innovation. In the future, using Galileo dual-frequency chipsets on smartphones would provide better resistance to multipath and therefore more accuracy. The mobile world is fast-paced and constantly evolving, and Europe's satellite navigation system is ready for the challenge. Although invisible to most, Galileo is already in your pocket. Check if your phone's using Galileo. Visit www.usegalileo.eu.
So that's interesting then, Eddie. We can use a website to check whether our device is equipped with Galileo. How does that work?
Indeed, there's this website, usegalileo.eu, where it lists a number of different tools, a number of different equipments, like mobile phones, farming tools, sea or air applications. And all of these receivers are now identified as using Galileo, and it's worth checking that if you want to know if your receiver can use Galileo itself.
I have to say, I think it's absolutely amazing how navigation has become such an important part in our lives. I remember even 10 years ago, it was something you had in your car if you had a very flash car, but not something that you had on your phone, that's for sure.
Yeah, navigation really has evolved quite a lot. If we look back at mobile phones, back in the early 90s, mobile phones were very large, heavy things. The batteries didn't last very long. They were single frequency and also a single system. And now if you look at mobile phones, they've really grown in a huge way, and you could do so much with them. Navigation also is following a very, very similar path. If you look at the navigation receivers that we are using originally compared to the ones now, they have really gone from also single constellation to multiple constellations, and also now there is a chipsets available which will actually do dual frequency.
Now, once the satellites are released, the French Space Agency, the CNES, will be taking control of them for the early operations.
Eh bien, ce lancement va mettre une fois de plus à l'honneur la politique spatiale européenne. D'abord, ça sera un lancement d'Ariane 5, et Ariane 5 est aujourd'hui, bien sûr, le cheval de bataille de l'Europe spatiale, et un lancement d'Ariane 5 qui va mettre en orbite 4 satellites Galileo, et Galileo, bien sûr, c'est l'un des projets les plus emblématiques de l'Europe spatiale, un projet de géolocalisation. Nous avons déjà mis 18 satellites Galileo en orbite, 4 de plus, ça fera 22, donc Galileo, c'est une affaire qui marche. Nous avons décidé l'année dernière, le 15 décembre, de déclarer ouverts les services initiaux de Galileo, parce que maintenant, si vous avez un smartphone, un iPhone 8 ou un Samsung 8, vous pouvez avoir une localisation grâce à Galileo. Et par rapport au GPS que tout le monde connaît, avec le GPS, vous savez dans quelle rue vous êtes, avec Galileo, vous savez de quel côté de la rue vous êtes. Et ça, c'est fondamental pour tout ce qu'on appelle l'Internet des objets, le véhicule connecté, le véhicule autonome. Donc, il y a une multitude d'applications qui sont en train de se mettre en place. J'étais il y a quelques jours à la première réunion des utilisateurs de Galileo qui a eu lieu à Madrid. On voit qu'on change de paradigme. La problématique, c'est bien sûr de fabriquer les satellites et de les lancer, ce que nous sommes en train de faire, mais la problématique qui s'annonce, c'est se servir de Galileo et de faire de Galileo le système de géolocalisation que le monde entier attend. Le CNES, en fait, est à l'origine de Galileo et de son signal unique au monde. Et d'ailleurs, l'un de nos collaborateurs, Roland Lestarki, a été récemment honoré puisqu'il a eu le prix de l'inventeur européen de l'année. C'était au mois de juin. D'ailleurs, peu de temps après, le président de la République l'a félicité sur le pavillon du CNES au Salon du Bourget. Et ce signal Galileo, il est absolument remarquable parce qu'il est beaucoup plus précis que le signal de système équivalent. Et puis, il a aussi une caractéristique remarquable, c'est puisqu'il permet la datation des événements avec une précision de milliardième de seconde. Et donc le signal Galileo, il est made in CNES, c'est un succès de plus à l'origine duquel le CNES peut s'enorgueillir d'être.
Quick reminder, we are just under 23 kilometers above our planet. We've separated our first two satellites. We still have our second two attached, and we are waiting for those to be separated next. Eddie, we've heard that Galileo switched on the services last year. We've had the initial ones. We've been hearing it's been going very well indeed.
Absolutely. Since we've had the declaration of initial services at the end of last year, our performance has been consistently better than 1 meter error. I mean, that's a very, very good performance. And as we add more satellites as well, our performance is actually improving, and also our availability. With the inclusion of these 4 satellites into the constellation, we go from an 80% availability up to more than 99%. That's a massive improvement in the availability of the system and the service that will be provided to the users.
Tell me, what does that actually mean to me on a day-to-day basis?
It means that we'll be able to position ourselves and use our receivers to find things much more accurately in the receivers that we have.
So, for example, if I'm driving along, I can actually find the front door of a house I'm looking for rather than the area in the street.
Indeed, because our positioning capability will be better than 2 meters, is what we've seen.
So it's quite remarkable. We're going to go over to a film now to find out a little bit more about these initial services that Galileo is providing.
One year ago, Europe officially welcomed Galileo. With the launch of initial services, Galileo moved from a testing phase to providing live services. While initial services are just the first step towards full operational capability, which will happen when the Galileo constellation is complete in 2020, users are already benefiting from Galileo's positioning, navigation, and timing information. Today, 40% of receiver models are Galileo-enabled, as are many leading smartphone models.
For deliveries, we always need accuracy on the phones. We need our perfect position always on the map. A lot of our deliveries are in areas with a lot of offices and high buildings. In the past, we always had issues with the positioning, and now it actually works perfectly. This saves us time, and time is money, of course.
The Galileo satellites are adding value for surveyors. Galileo makes a bigger difference in cities and forests. And here in Estonia, it's very important as we have more than a half country covered by a forest. Galileo signals are more stable even in low-angle visibility, so especially good here in the northern region of Europe.
I usually use my mobile phone to find some places on the map. I used to find that my phone wouldn't work so well around tall buildings in the city center, but I've noticed that it's works much better and doesn't lose my position like before. And I heard that is because of a new European satellite system.
Thanks to the Galileo Search and Rescue Service, emergency responders can locate a distress signal faster and more effectively than ever.
It's almost unbelievable that a small beacon that fits in your hand can be localized globally. These beacons are the perfect solution because the distress signals can be detected and localized around the world.
With initial services, Galileo is just getting started. As more satellites are added and new services become available, Galileo will provide better coverage, better positioning, and an even better user experience. Galileo is a European Union program, and the European GNSS Agency is dedicated to delivering valuable Galileo services and ensuring that space is linked to user needs.
So, talk us through what we're looking at here.
This is actually the upper stage, what we're seeing at the moment, and the the two satellites are still attached on the upper stage, waiting to be released. You see it on the small screen at the moment, and it's not quite orientating it so we can see very clearly, but actually you have the two solar arrays which are still closed in on those two satellites, just on the side, and then you can see a few dots on the top there. That's actually the search and rescue antenna on the satellites itself.
We'll probably get to see those in a minute, actually, Eddie, because we can't see them very easily there. But I just want to let everybody know that the satellites actually have names. They're called Nicole, Zofia, Alexandra and Irina. How did they get them?
Indeed, there was a competition that was held quite a few years ago, and a number of children from the member states sent in a number of drawings, and then the winners of those drawings had their names put to those satellites.
So number 19 is Nicole, who's from Austria. Number 20 is Zofia from Poland. Number 21 is Alexander from Portugal. And number 22 is Irina, who's from Romania. Huge congratulations to all of you boys and girls who have the satellites named after you. The satellites were built by the prime contractor OHB at their plant in Bremen in Germany. And of course, OHB is in charge of a huge consortium of different companies and organizations who have built the satellites. Everybody down to the tiniest screws, the contractors making bits and pieces and parts. And of course, the payloads were supplied by the UK-based Surrey Satellites, SSTL, which is mainly owned now by Airbus Defence and Space. Eddie, I mean, ESA oversees designing the satellites and the overall project, and you're actually in charge of that. This is a huge task. What does it actually involve?
Well, ESA is the overall system architect, and ESA is responsible for the original design and development of the Galileo system. We're also responsible for ensuring that the system meets the actual mission goals and objectives that were defined from together with the EEC. With such a large project, there are many interfaces and many entities and other organizations who are involved and working together with us on the particular project. So as ESA, as the system architect, one of the main activities we do is to maintain those system requirements and ensure the flow down of those requirements coherently to all the parties who are involved. This is very similar to a role of an architect from a home who's following all of the construction and all of the little parts like the bricks to make sure that everything meets the final vision that they had when they drew the whole thing together.
But it is such a vast project, and I'm always amazed really about how things sort of come together and all the teams working together. So, you know, congratulations to everybody for pulling this off. And of course you do as well have the other thing, which is you sort of have to have a bit of a crystal ball and look into the future, because the satellites have to live for 12 years. And this is of course one of the issues in space, isn't it? It really is. Technologically, you guys are really at the cutting edge of research and development.
Indeed, I mean, satellite technology is at the forefront of many things that we do, and it's pushing industry to develop the latest items and the latest tools, and it keeps the European industry right at the forefront of the work.
So you can see, just to remind everybody, our altitude hasn't changed down there on the bottom left, because we are staying on the same plane to release our next two satellites, but we will be releasing them at a slightly different angle to stop them from bumping into each other. Our distance in the middle of the screen, we've travelled 15,000 kilometres from the launch pad if we were to draw a straight line across the planet. And we are travelling at just under 3 kilometres per second, and there's our trajectory on the top right-hand side. I mean, 3 kilometres per second is slower than what we were travelling at, because we were travelling at one stage at 9 kilometres per second. But it always amazes me, Eddie, things look like they're happening very slowly, but of course actually we are travelling incredibly fast.
Indeed, this is a relative speed, and everything from the space, it looks very, very.
Just to translate that for everybody, she said this is the last orientation maneuver now, getting ready for the separation of the next two satellites.
Just what we see here as well, it's nice to see that you see a large disc in the middle. That's actually the navigation antenna. Once the satellites are on the final station, those are the antennas which will be transmitting the navigational signals down to the users and down to our Earth. And also you see there just above the diamond-shaped item, which is the search and rescue.
Hang on a minute, let's just check that diamond-shaped item. So we're looking at the two satellites. You can see the long rectangles of the solar panels, and then just to the left above those, on the sort of top
right on the
left-hand,
tip, yes.
Those are...
You see a sort of six coils and then a circular disc in the middle.
Séparation des deux satellites Galileo numéro 20 et 22.
We have separation of the next two satellites, 20 and 22. Congratulations to all the teams, to all the Galileo teams, European Space Agency, the European Commission, to OHB, and all the teams who've contributed to making these satellites. We can see them moving away there, Eddie.
Absolutely, and now the launcher itself has done the main part of its particular job, and it has to start its activities for passivation and for the graveyarding.
So we are going to keep on with our show, because we still want to check that everything's going according to plan. And so talk us through what we're going to be waiting for next, Eddie.
Well, obviously now the satellites have actually come off from the dispenser, the main work for the ground segment for the early operations teams has actually started. So this is the people down in Toulouse, our colleagues in CNES, who will be continuing to check out the performance and the platform of the satellites, to check out the equipments and the subsystems, and then the satellites actually started to bring those dormant equipments to life and switch them on. And then the satellite will slowly be drifting towards its actual slots. And this will take quite a bit of time, up till February or March next year, when the satellites will reach their final position. Then the satellites will have to start switching on the payload, expunging any unwanted gases that still remain as it switches on. This is a process called outgassing of the satellites. And once that's all completed, then we can actually start the in-orbit testing of the payloads and the characterization of the satellites.
So we lifted off from the pad nearly 4 hours ago. It was a super launch. Everything went according to plan. Like clockwork, the satellite's in the nose of the vehicle there. The 11th launch of the year. The 6th Ariane 5 to lift off from the Guiana Space Center this year, carrying our 4 satellites on board. Galileo's 19 to 22. Nicole, Zofia, Alexander, and Irina, they are called. Right now we are, this was 4 hours ago, right now our satellites are in space. We did have quite a lot of cloud cover, but we got lucky because the launcher came, well, we could actually see the fire, the boosters there powering away from behind the clouds. What was it like? You saw it in real life.
I think it was a beautiful thing to see raising up into the sky. It's absolutely magical.
You know, I've been thinking a little bit about navigation, Eddie, and of course it's been the key to sort of the rich and powerful, hasn't it, throughout history, those who could navigate the planet, like, for example, the Vikings. Were able to get certainly very rich and powerful. They were quite creative, actually. Obviously, they used the stars, like a lot of navigators, but they also used to carry ravens on board, birds, and they'd release a bird, and if it flew away, they knew that land was near. But there was also another person in 1869 who wrote some interesting stuff. Space-based navigation might not be quite as new a concept as you might think. His name was Edward Hale, and he wrote a short story. It was called Brick Moon, and in it he imagined a satellite which was made of bricks. And it got launched into space with people apparently accidentally on board, and it circled the planet, and the inhabitants would send Morse code signals to Earth to guide mariners at sea. Well, it's actually quite sort of forward-thinking of him, wasn't it? Because, of course, navigation, just to remind us how it works, it is all based on signals.
Indeed, and this is always interesting to see if the science fiction is ahead of us or our scientists are managing to keep in front of them. It's interesting to remember as well that the name Galileo was taken on board by the project back in around about 98. Previous to that, we were still calling it GNSS-2. The name Galileo obviously has a background and a history to us as well. The person Galileo Galilei, he was actually an astronomer, and he was actually studying the moons of Jupiter, and he was very, very interested in time and maintaining time and counting time. And it was based on his work and his studies of Jupiter that then the fact that he was able to monitor time very, very accurately, and hence the name Galileo was coined within this project.
Fascinating, isn't it? So what are we waiting for now, Eddie?
Well, we're waiting for the satellites to confirm their telemetry and confirm their position, confirm the fine positioning. Or sorry, not the fine positioning, but the orbit that they're in. Also, at the same time, the upper stage is doing its activities to passivate itself.
Yes, because of course the upper stage's job is not done yet. It has released the satellites, but it still has more jobs to do. It's called, as you say, passivation. And what happens during that time?
Well, the upper stage obviously is having to orientate itself, despin it, put itself in a safe location away from the to put itself into a safe orbit. It has to remove any fuel that it has left and discharge all of its batteries.
So, as you say, we are now waiting to get the health checks for the satellites to call home and tell us that everything's going according to plan. Now, you've been telling us a little bit about what's happening next, and we are going to be going to a film shortly to explain to us in a little bit more detail about what we call the launch and early operations phase.
Following the deployment from the launcher system, each satellite will switch on automatically and will perform a sequence of autonomous operations commanded by the onboard computer. This will include the switch on of the telemetry tracking and command transponder, allowing communication with the constellations, the spacecraft attitude stabilization, the deployment of solar arrays, and finally, the pointing of the spacecraft to the sun, allowing the recharge of the spacecraft batteries. The sequence will be closely followed by the Galileo Layout Control Center at CNES in Toulouse, France, through a number of ground stations. Following the initial startup sequence, the satellite will undergo a number of checks to confirm the good status of all platform equipment. After approximately 6 days, the satellites will be commanded to slowly move to the assigned in-orbit slots using the satellite propulsion system. After 3 to 4 weeks, the payload of the first pair of satellites will then be activated. The payload of the second pair will be activated 3 weeks later. After payload activation, the in-orbit testing will start and last for several weeks, aiming at characterizing the performance of the navigation payload and of the search and rescue payload. Second half of May 2018, FM15 and 17 will be ready, and FM16 and 18 will reach the same status in the first half of July 2018. With these 4 new satellites, the Galileo Constellation performance and availability will be further enhanced and extended across the entire globe.
So our satellites are up in space, our 4 Galileo satellites. We lifted off from the pad just over 4 hours ago, and we separated them 2 by 2, the first 2 and then the second 2 20 minutes later.
Début de phase de passivation du système de contrôle d'attitude.
And as we explained earlier, the upper stage still has what we call the passivation process to go through, and the range operations manager there just announced the beginning of that passivation phase. So this is the Jupiter control room. We are waiting now for the health checks of our satellites, which will take, we'll be waiting a little bit more for those, because that obviously takes a bit of time. But in the meantime, we're going to take a look outside and have a look at some shots, some drone shots of the Guiana Space Center. Our drone has been flying around, and we're going to take a look at those now, and we will be coming back to you in a little while once we get closer to getting our health checks.
Drying
Début de passivation des réservoirs MMH de l'EPS.
And we are now expecting the CEO of Arianespace, Stéphane Israël, to take the floor. We were flying there with the drone over French Guiana on the northeastern coast of the Amazonian South America. The Amazon rainforest. And Stéphane Israël, the CEO of Arianespace, is taking the floor now.
So, ladies and gentlemen, a short status point. So the 4 satellites are on the targeted orbit. We have acquired the signal for the 4th of them. We have the confirmation of the solar panel deployment for the first 2, and all parameters are perfect. So we are just waiting a few minutes more to have the same information for the 2 others, and I will come back in a few minutes, but I think that we will enjoy a good evening.
So confirmation there that we have had the separation, that they're on the right orbit. Do you want to just recap there for us?
Indeed, it sounds like everything's proceeded nominally. We're just waiting for a final confirmation of the orbit and of the actual details. But everything looks good at the moment.
We're going to go back to our drone in a second and start flying back over the Amazon rainforest. It's no surprise that it's called the Amazon rainforest. It has been raining all day, and when I say raining, I mean raining. It's been incredibly solid, hasn't it?
I have to say, I think we've been very lucky that we've had an opportunity to see the launch and that it's not been completely clouded over.
But of course, when the sun's shining, it's absolutely stunning. Very beautiful.
Les passivations des réservoirs MMH et NDO4 de l'EPS se poursuivent nominalement.
There we go. There's the car park that we could see there as we flew over. This is we're actually looking here at a globe on top of the building that issues the badges, the passes. And that car going past is going down what we call the Route de l'Espace, the Road of Space, or the Space Road. So it's dark here now, but of course it was mid-afternoon when we lifted off from the pad over 4 hours ago. And in that film, you might have noticed some big puddles and sort of pools of water on the ground because it has been very, very wet, although it looks like the rain has stopped. So we launched our satellites into space. We are waiting now for the confirmations and health checks. Just talk us through quickly again to remind everyone, Eddie, what we're waiting for.
Indeed, after the satellites separate away from the dispenser, the satellites themselves will switch on their computers. It will be checking all of its subsystems. It will be orientating itself towards the sun. It will be deploying the solar arrays. And all this information is obviously coming down to our ground control center, where they'll be monitoring it and checking that everything has happened correctly on board the satellites themselves.
Now, we've been talking about the fact that the Galileo system has been switched on already. It was switched on last year and the satellites became operational, so we've had some services, but we haven't really talked so much about future services.
Indeed. The initial services have been going for quite some time, and the original purpose of the initial services was to give a concrete number of signals for people to use and for people just to see what would be coming in the future. And that was for the open service, the search and rescue, and for the PRS. At the end of 2018, we'll actually be entering another phase called the enhanced services. At that point then, our performances and our quality of our service will be committed.
So it's a very useful and important piece of kit that we're deploying up there in the skies, this constellation, this Galileo constellation.
Indeed, it's going to be a huge benefit to the globe and to everybody in society.
At the beginning of the programme, I was talking with the Director General of the European Space Agency, Jan Werner, about some of the big space programmes that ESA is working on and deploying. One of those, of course, is the Copernicus program, which is a big flagship program with the European Union to help us to understand our planet. But ESA is a hugely important agency deploying all kinds of satellites into space. What is the future looking like?
There are many more launches yet to come from ESA. For example, Bepi Colombo is a very, very important launch that's also happening next year.
What's Bepi Colombo?
Bepi Colombo is a science mission that will go to the planet of Mercury. And that's, of course, is the closest planet to the sun. So the environment for the satellite, once it gets there, will be hugely, hugely challenging. If anything doesn't happen quite as we expect and it points incorrectly, then of course there could be some loss of the mission for that particular Bepi Colombo. So it's a very, very exciting mission and a very challenging mission for us as well. But hopefully, I'm sure it will be very fruitful and it'll bring back lots of science for us.
We've also got the launch of the James Webb Telescope coming up, haven't we?
Indeed, that's also a very, very exciting mission as well.
Yeah, tell us about that one.
So the James Webb Space Telescope, this is actually going to be replacing the Hubble telescope, which is up there and been up there for some time. Obviously, with a newer satellite and a newer technology, we hope to be getting even better images of deep space and even better studies of other galaxies and other stars.
Who are we looking at here?
These are indeed our ESA colleagues. We have Javier Benedicto, who's our project manager for Galileo and within navigation, and I see many smiling faces down there as they're looking, waiting for the telemetry to turn up. Obviously, our mission director there, Jean-Claude Chiarini, and the space segment manager himself, Giuliano Gatti.
What do they do, all these different people?
Well, obviously we have many different activities within Galileo itself. Besides the space segment, there's obviously the ground segment as well. But all of our colleagues here, which you can see on the screens, they're very focused on the procurement of the space segment parts and the space segment activities.
So we still have a couple of minutes left to wait, but all perfectly normal, all part of the plan. We can see Thierry Fayem, we saw back there as well, who I believe is the program director for Arianespace. Everyone's got their blue T-shirts on. For people who are unfamiliar with the launch, what's the idea behind the polo shirts? I guess to identify the teams.
Indeed, yes. I mean, what you see here is that a number of the ESA team members there, we're all in the nice, smart blue uniforms, with a showing of unity, indeed, of our teams and of our colleagues as well. It helps pick us out as well, so you can see who's who.
And we can see the VIPs there who have been waiting patiently during this phase to find out about the mission accomplishment. A minute or so to go.
I think it's worth noting as well that obviously this is the first generation of Galileo within ESA as well. We're also looking further to the future as well. With every science and every space project, it takes a certain amount of time for the development. So within ESA, we're already looking towards the next generation of Galileo as well. And ESA is doing a number of studies, developing new ideas and new technologies as well, which hopefully will then give an even better performance than this first generation.
I tell you what, Eddie, you know, when mobile phones first came out, the bricks, who could have even imagined touchscreens or being connected to the internet back then? I wonder if you've got any amazing predictions for navigation.
Well, I mean, navigation at the end of the day is a tool, and it depends on how that tool in particular is applied. This is the crystal ball of the future, and what we're trying to do within ESA is to put the first few tools available on the table so that people can use them, and then we're going to see a huge growth in different inventions and different ideas and different applications for the use of those tools. And this is what's really, really exciting, because you can take the first few steps in creating something, and then who knows what are the other ideas that people will come up with location-based services, with finding where you want to go to for your quick and easy cup of coffee. There are many, many opportunities out there just based on navigation. Oh, I see a huge round of applause going up with everybody.
Well, this is looking good, Eddie.
I think success has been achieved.
Ladies and gentlemen, Arianespace is delighted to confirm that the 4 Galileo satellites have been safely separated on their targeted medium Earth orbits. The pointing of Galileo ground station's antennas towards the payload is nominal, so is the deployment of their solar panels. Nicole, Sofia, Alexandra, and Irina, I hope I am correct on their names, are the 19th to 22nd Galileo spacecraft orbited by Arianespace. They will soon join their teammates in the Constellation to reinforce Galileo services. For the second time, the use of the Ariane 5 ES enabling the launch of 4 Galileo satellites at a time allows us to maintain the pace we achieved the last 2 years in deploying the Constellation. I would like to express my gratitude to Vice President Maros Sefcovic and Commissioner Bienkowska, as well as Deputy Director General Pierre Delceau and Matthias Petschke. Pierre and Matthias are with us, and I have had good news from Vice President and Commissioners. for the trust, the continuous trust of the European Commission and DG Growth in Arianespace. I would like also to thank for sure the European Space Agency, our long-standing partner in charge of the Galileo space segment, and as such, our direct customer for this launch. I wish to thank Jan Werner. Jan was so confident in our launch that he has had to come back to Paris for an ESA council, which is a very good excuse. So he will learn the news a few hours later. And I want to thank all the representatives with us tonight. Paul Verhoff, responsible for Galileo and navigation, and Daniel Neuenschwander, who is the responsible of launchers in ESA. In 2018, one more Ariane 5 ES will continue the job, followed in 2020 and 2021 by 2 Ariane 62 launches, leading to 30 Galileo satellites in orbit and full operation of the Constellation. By being the first customer to choose Ariane 6, the European Commission and the European Space Agency give a key signal of commitment to the next generation of Arianespace launchers, which will reaffirm more than ever its mission to ensure Europe's autonomous access to space. I want also to thank the European Global Navigation Satellite System Agency, GSA, who, as of today's launch, is in charge of the satellite's operations. Let me highlight the presence of Carlo Desdorides, GSA Executive Director, with us tonight in Jupiter. For sure, I need to thank OHB. OHB is a great partner of Arianespace. OHB is also one of our shareholders, and I want to thank OHB for its trust and the new success of these Galileo satellites. We have now 4 more OHB satellites in our backlog. We have today with us Alain Boris and Wolfgang Petsch, and thank you to OHB for our partnership. For this flight, for this launch, we are delighted to welcome a large delegation representing many member states of ESA. We have with us high representatives of Germany, of Belgium, of Sweden, and Estonia and France. This gives a wonderful picture of the European space team. I want to thank the Belgian Minister of Transport, François Bello, who is with us tonight. And I would like to highlight also the presence of Wolfgang Scheremet, Director General of the Ministry for Economy and Energy. Wolfgang Scheremet is representing tonight Minister Brigitte Cypris, who wanted to be with us tonight, but it was not possible. And it's important we have Wolfgang Scheremet tonight with us because, as a matter of fact, this launch is very German. You know that the Aestus, who has delivered a very good job tonight, is fully produced in Germany, and we know that the OHB satellites are also produced in Germany. Germany is a key partner of all our successes. Ladies and gentlemen, this 11th successful flight in 2017, the 6th with Ariane, and the 82 success in a row for heavyweight vehicle, is also the last launch of the year from the CSG. Thanks to flawless operation of our launch vehicle family, 6 Ariane 5, 2 Soyuz, and 3 Vega, our track record for 2017 is once again outstanding. We have many partners for these successes. We have for sure ESA and all member states of the Ariane program whose support is tremendous. We have Ariane Group, Ariane 5 prime and first shareholder, and for sure our partner for this success. We have CNES, both qualification authority for Ariane 5, and our daily partner here in CSG. We have also all our contractors in French Guiana and all employees as the Guiana Space Center. Of course, I would like to finish my speech by celebrating Arianespace colleagues. You have done one more year, very outstanding year. All our successes are collective successes, and they are the successes of our teams in Arianespace. So I now would like to welcome to the stage our customers and partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good evening. It's actually a very good evening. And I would like to thank all of those who have been able to cooperate for these projects and for these projects to become a success. And so I would like to thank Arianespace, ESA, GSA, OHB. But I would like also to have a special thanks for my colleagues from the Commission, because it might not have been obvious from the different presentations you have heard today, but Galileo is a program which is run and managed by the European Commission. And many of my colleagues have spent many years working on this and to make it a success. They are not in the sunlight, but they are quite effective, and without them, today will not be a success. So I would like really to have a round of applause for them. And actually, it's quite interesting that the EU member state, and I'm insisting on the EU member state, have decided to dedicate a part of the budget to a program like Galileo. Because let's be clear, we don't have so many successful projects at European level, where all 28 member states are working together to deliver something which will make a difference. And if I look at the reasons which are behind this decision by the member states, I see two fundamental reasons. First of all, they've realized that working alone is not possible for a project like Galileo. Without cooperation between all the member states, Galileo would simply not exist. Not one single member state could deliver it without cooperation with the others. So there was no choice. Either we would not have Galileo or would be working together. And the second reason why it's a success and why it's a project which has been adopted at EU level is actually the fact that today we have not launched 4 satellites. What we have done, we have launched provider of services. And that's much more important at the end of the day. And sorry for the engineers working on the satellites. Sorry for OHB. But the real reason is why we want those satellites is simply because we know and we really believe that in the future, geolocalization will be fundamental for many services in the world. It's already the case now, but it will be even more true in the future. And if we want Europeans to remain in the lead, if we want our economy to remain competitive, we need to provide high-quality services. And today, again, with the launch that we have done, it may seem obvious launching 4 satellites at a time, but it's not so obvious, actually, I know, from a technical point of view. We have done it last year. We are doing it today, and I'm sure that in a few months' time, we will do it again. But still, it's quite complicated. But thanks to this effort, to those efforts, we will have enough satellites to provide the services which no one else in the world is able to deliver. And I've heard in the presentation that Galileo is still referred by comparison to GPS, the European GPS. I make a bet in a few years' time, GPS will be called the American Galileo. And and I would like again to congratulate everybody and to wish you Merry Christmas and Happy New Year with 4 more satellites.
So, Minister, member of the Parliament, dear colleagues, and Galileo fans everywhere. So let me share with you what does it mean 4 more satellites for the Galileo constellation from the GSA point of view. So first of all, it means the remaining 4 satellites for the baseline, which we need for the enhanced service milestone step, which will be announced in about 1 year time. So this means, in concrete, a better availability. Yesterday you have seen in the diagram there were some holes around the world. These holes will be decreased, and hence the accuracy will be improved. But the enhanced service milestone will be more than that. It will be also a step when Galileo will start to deploy some specific features which do not exist in the other system, namely the so-called open signal authentication, which is stamps which the positioning data are indeed trustable. It will be possible to have the return link for the search and rescue mission, which means we know statistically this return link that the distressed people will be informed that the rescue team has been launched, so saving life. And finally, this will be also the opening of the service for the PRS, the public regulated service, which will start to enjoy the automatic distribution of the keys, and we expect that from that point in time, also the PRS will start gradually to be more and more adopted. But indeed, we do not need to wait up to the end of the year, up to this enhanced service milestone, because very soon, already in April next year, we will have a very important appointment, which is the entering into force of the so-called eCall regulation. Very important because as of April, all the new car model manufactured in Europe having in-car navigation have to be Galileo compatible. Very important because this means in a couple of years, 13 million of new cars compatible with Galileo. And as you can imagine, gradually this number will quickly increase. So this is certainly a market opportunity for many of you who are here. And finally, the enhanced service, finally, next year, very soon, we have heard that we had a new chip exploiting the two frequencies. Well, in spring next year, we expect to see the smartphone using this chip. And again, this is important for Galileo because it means that Galileo is used at its full potential. Today, Galileo has more satellites operating in dual frequency than GPS. So this is the first important, let's say, answer to the question, what does it mean for satellites for the agency? The second one is indeed that this is quite an important piece of work. Piece of work which is addressing quite an important market, a market which is talking to 7 billion users, a market which is valued $70 billion in 2025. So this means a huge market potential. It means that Europe is building the first pan-European infrastructure, which will be populated by application and services, which will bring a tangible and significant value, economic value. And finally, 4 more satellites for the Galileo constellation from the GSA perspective means a fantastic piece of work. It means I was coming here today and I was making a rough computation, and I find out that the only launch of the 4 satellites and the manufacturing of the rocket means 2,200 man-years of work, 2,200 of very skilled many years of work. So this is really an opportunity to thank, first of all, OHB for the excellent work which has been done so far. Certainly CNES for, again, a new expert launch. CNES, which is actually on the first row, on the first line
for the LEOP operation, and certainly the European Space Agency and the Commission for the good cooperation and the trust which have granted so far for the GSA. And of course, this is an opportunity also to thank all the GSA team, which has been, who has been working hard to get to this point. So a real thanks to all of them. And finally, I would like to recognize and thank the visionary hackers, entrepreneurs, public authorities, and leading business across the globe that have embraced Galileo. Today, we are honored to have leaders from 5 of the major device and chip manufacturers here today that have already Galileo-enabled their products. So a real thanks to them to be here with us. A satellite launch is exciting because it is an inspiring and inspirational beginning. In fact, the English word launch literally means to start or set in motion. Today, Europe has set in motion 4 more catalysts for employment and innovation that will contribute to a whole new range of services for users. Services that are delivered by a professionally and highly committed GSA. Thank you.
Good. This is a good job done. This is fantastic. This is always nice. I'm sorry we had to let you wait for a while. We had, as you will know, with the first 2 FOC satellites, a bit of a problem. We thought that it was all going well at the time, and we found out half an hour later that it wasn't going very well. And since then, we have agreed with the colleagues from Arianespace in particular that we will wait to make sure that the satellites are in order. So we have now the solar panels deployed on all the satellites. We have confirmation that they are in good order, that they are in a very good orbit, and that everything is fine. And you had to wait a bit for this, but this is better than having to announce that maybe it hasn't gone well. So from my side, this is once more an important milestone where we have worked together with many, many colleagues. You saw the whole bunch here just getting together. We've gotten to know each other very, very well here. There is a lot of trust between the teams from Arianespace, from the CNES, from the local authorities, from the Ariane group, joined now by the GSA, by Space Opal. So it is a lot of effort done by a lot of people. The Commission is always involved, so you see, as Pierre says, the combination of all of this together, the public and private sectors, is doing this result. So I would like to, from my side, also thank everybody. I think we're going to go for a drink. I can need one, I can tell you, and I'll see you tonight.
So first, I want to thank Arianespace for the perfect launch, the professionalism, and to have delivered our babies in good health. Je veux aussi remercier le CNES pour tout le travail sur la base, bien entendu, mais aussi tout le travail.
I'd also like to thank everybody here at the Space Center for the work done so far, and also for LEOP.
Customers, the Commission and the European Space Agency for their trust and their constant support. Our suppliers also, all around Europe, and in particular our partner SSTL. Besonders möchte ich auch mich beim OAB-Team für die harte Arbeit bedanken, diese 4 Satelliten fertigzustellen.
In producing these 4 satellites.
Each launch is a new endeavor for the launcher and for the satellites, and there is no routine, even if we have already launched 14 satellites plus the 4 of today. Each time the experience increases, but the success is not for granted. We are proud at OHB to have been able to put in place a reliable production process, as Wolfgang Pech described yesterday, in such a clear presentation, by the way, that it looked so simple. But I can tell you it is not simple. It is very sophisticated, hence surprise, Mr. Delso. This production process is our best asset to be able to complete the constellation and have Galileo fully operational in due time. And we are thankful to our customers to have placed again their trust in OHB for the third batch of satellites, 8 satellites plus an option of 4, which has been confirmed some weeks ago. We are also proud that these satellites, this new batch, will be among the first launched by Ariane 6, also because we are a strong contributor to this new launcher through our subsidiary MT Aerospace, both for the rocket itself and for the launch pad, which we visited today. So, again, long life to our babies, Nicole, Zofia, Alexandre, and Irina. Thank you.
So, colleagues and friends, those who know me very well here in the room, they know that I often have a lot of words to say. Don't be afraid, I won't do it. It's too late. I just want to say one thing. In recent years, we had a lot of interesting discussions on new space and on commercialization of space and on the new way and the new competitor from the United States. In the last 27 hours, I learned that we have our own way. It's a European way, and I think it's a perfect way. So congratulations to Arianespace, to ESA, to CNES, to OHB, to the European Commission. So congratulations to Europe. Let's move. Thanks.
I would also like to thank everybody involved. For 50 years, all of these parties have been investing in this tremendous project. It's probably the most complete, truly European project. That's because there were researchers who invested in all of this, and they really believed in it. Obviously, we're following the United States and the Russians, but I think we're going to overtake them as regards to this technology. I was taking a look at all of the people there, the teams, taking photos, but behind them there are millions of researchers. There are millions of people who are now actually retired, and they weren't here to share it today, but I'm sure that they're appreciating the fact that they made their contribution way back in time. So obviously this is a step on the way. The data provider is open data. And there are 4 areas and where we're going to see applications. First of all, the public at large will see what Galileo is, will appreciate it, and will be able to use the results available to the public at large. And then there are the commercial developments, the different applications that have been identified. I think there are some 300 or so researchers in Belgium said that there were hundreds of applications possible in many different areas, whether it's marine activities or elsewhere. These obviously have economic impact, but also environmental and industrial significance as well as others. And it will make it possible for them to continue research as well. Thirdly, and this again more for specialists, is the universal clock. All of the applications that can be made possible there. And in the world of finance, we know how important this is. We know that the Rothschild wealth came largely because they had a more rapid communication system than the British Army did. We were talking about days in those times, but now it's microseconds. And then it's also the question of security, classified data, interstate communications. I mean, this is a civilian project we're talking about, but at the same time, it's a security-based project. As a Belgian minister, I have to say how happy I am and delighted I am that Belgium believed in this significant project right from the word go. And it truly is a European project. It's sometimes difficult for Europe to find its way, particularly in politics, but here politicians placed their trust in something that wasn't terribly visible. It wasn't easy to put a finger on, but now we're seeing it taking shape. So I'd like to thank all of you, all of the teams, all of the scientists, all of the academics, the young people, the less young people, the European Commission, ESA, and all of the industrial partners who've contributed to this project and who've made the launch a success, as were all of those before it. And it's just one step on the way to more applications. At the last but one European Council that we had in Frankfurt on autonomous vehicles, we realized that applications such as Galileo will give a real fillip to the sector. We know that constructors are thinking about autonomous vehicles in the 2023 or whatever. What's missing is a guidance system, in other words, a position for the vehicle, not just in relation to other vehicles, but in relation to physical obstacles and other objects. So Galileo will make a contribution there, and significant developments will be made. So I'd like to encourage you to continue to move towards Ariane 6 and further developments. We know that digitalization is on our doorsteps, and we see all of these developments are compulsory in our modern world. But the step made today through these sort of investments and scientific and industrial projects are vital if we're to move towards sustainable development, bearing in mind the social and economic components, and also the environmental side of things that we're also concerned with and want to make a contribution to in order to preserve the best possible environment for future generations. As we reach the end of the year, no, I don't know whether it was a Christmas tree decoration or four that went up into the sky at the same time, but let me say to you, for your families, so those close to you, your friends, your family, your colleagues, everybody, that I wish you all the best, not only for next year, but for the coming years.
Bien, mesdames et messieurs, donc il me reste à vous donner rendez-vous le 25 janvier.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the 25th of January of next year will be the first Ariane 5 launch of the year, and it'll be for two major operators, SES, SES-14, and YASAT with Alia 3. So it's going to be a very international launch. Merry Christmas, and thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
So it is mission accomplished once again for Arianespace, and the 82nd success in a row for Ariane 5. Galileo's 19, 20, 21 and 22, Nicole, Zofia, Alexander and Irina, are now heading out on their journey to their final orbit. Our great congratulations to the European Space Agency, to the European Commission, to the GSA, the manufacturing teams, of course, led by OHB, and to Arianespace and the teams here at the CSG. And huge thanks to you, Eddie, for joining me here in the commentary box.
Thanks very much to you as well. And also, I would like to say a thanks to all the people who've been listening in. Obviously, it's very late for many of you in Europe, so you've been staying up quite late to listen to us, and especially to our friends and colleagues from Brussels, Germany, Italy, France, Spain, and the UK, and to all the teams who are still working on Galileo and operating it as we speak.
And we're going to leave you now with the images of the launch at 3:36 in the afternoon, Kourou time. And best of luck now to the LEOPS teams taking over the flying of these satellites, Eddie.
And also to the IoT teams who will be testing these afterwards as well. And finally to the operations teams who are looking after the full fleet of our satellites and the ground infrastructure.
Thanks for joining us live at the Guiana Space Center. From me, Katie Haswell.
And from me, Eddie Yao.
Goodbye.
2, 1, top, allumage et décollage.